Hello, everyone, and welcome back to When Movies Were Good with Rachel and Matthew down here in Melbourne, Australia, still in lockdown. Matt's about 10 kilometres away from me in his home. I'm in the resort studios, aka my small flat. Matt, how are you doing today?
Yeah, I'm good. I can't believe we're Skyping still for our podcast, even though we're that short a distance apart, as if we were on the other side of the planet. But glad we had this technology when it works, so we can keep up the podcast.
Yeah, sometimes we've taken to recording remotely in the mornings because at night the bandwidth, I'm not sure if it's my side or whatever, we just can't seem to get the Skype working at all.
It's because
When
the
we're
kids
trying.
don't watch actual television anymore. It's all this streaming kerfuffle, and it takes up all the bandwidth.
That's true. I literally can't get on at night in Skype when it's that sort of main part of the night where everyone's watching Netflix and all the rest of it. So, sort of sad state of affairs, but that's fine. We're probably a bit more bright and breezy in the morning. So, Matt, just quickly, did you want to run everyone through? We're doing not Dracula versus Frankenstein, but Dracula and Frankenstein, starring
Although
the
that would make
great.
a new movie very interesting.
Yeah, exactly. I wish they'd get the Universal Dark Universe going again. I think they've tried and failed, but that's fine. So, Matt, did you want to just run everyone through our social media just really quickly, and we'll get on with 1931's Dracula and 1931's Frankenstein?
Yeah, no worries. So we have our usual social media channels. There's Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at When Movies Were Good. You can now get this podcast not only on YouTube, as we've always been on, but also now on proper pure audio streams, so Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And although you can't do it on Spotify yet, on Apple Podcasts, you can leave us reviews. And so if you do have the chance to put your mouse clicker onto the 5-star confirm, we would greatly appreciate it. It helps us get in front of more people.
Yeah, definitely. And thanks to Matt for all of his technical know-how. Wouldn't be able to do
Quote
this
unquote.
podcast. Wouldn't be able to do this podcast without him. So big thanks to Matt. So we're going to jump right into it. I was joking around that I chose these films because they were released the year that Larry Hagman was born. Let's just get that right out of the way to start. We'll start off with that, and then that's out of the way. Okay. All right. So these two films and the stories themselves. So Bram Stoker's Dracula story, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, which were written in the 1800s. I'm correct in that, Matt, aren't I? They were very, very old books. And
yeah,
by the time...
so Frankenstein, that came out of, want to say about eight. Oh, no, I think I mixed. I was going to say 1813. I think I'm mixing it up with Pride and Prejudice. Let's see. Look, 19th century. The audience doesn't need to hear us Googling.
Yeah. Yeah, the books came out. Let's have a look here. So, yeah, Dracula was 1897, written by Abraham Stoker. And then Mary Shelley wrote Frankenstein. And I think that was even before that. Sorry, there's so many dates and times with all of these films. Sometimes the novel by Mary Shelley was written even further back than that, I believe, 1818. So these are really, in terms of modern literature, they're really old books, and they had to wait, for films and the technology of films and all the rest of it. So we're going to discuss Dracula first because that came out first and paved the way for Frankenstein, essentially. So there had already been a German expressionist film, Nosferatu, in the 1920s, which was borrowed heavily with Max Schreck, I believe, in the role of Nosferatu, which is just another word for vampire, I guess, in their vernacular. And that film in itself definitely has a part of cinematic history, although Bram Stoker and I believe his family weren't too happy with that film. Were they? I think they were sued and copies of that film were destroyed. Obviously, there's ones that still exist. But the first Dracula that everyone is mostly familiar with is the great Bela Lugosi, who actually, Lugosi is a surname taken from the area of Hungary that he was born in. That was the town, and that's where he created his stage name Blasco. It was Bela Blasco was actually his actual name. So I like how a lot of these older actors just decided to reinvent themselves and give themselves a brand new name that fits in with their sort of horror roots. So we have Dracula 1931. So let's just go briefly. For those of you that aren't aware of the story of Dracula, and this version of Dracula, I don't think there has actually ever been a definitive version of the book of Dracula. Every single version of Dracula that's come out has borrowed bits and pieces from the book, but essentially then crafted their own version of the story. So Transylvania, which is located in that area, I guess you'd say, Hungary, Romania, that sort of area, locals warned Solicitor Renfield against going to Count Dracula's castle for business reasons. They dread that a vampire lives there, but Dracula, the vampire, disguised as a driver, takes Renfield there, and then from there they end up over in London, where Dracula meets somebody he falls in love with, I guess you could say. Matt, what are your thoughts on this film?
Well, I thought it was just really enthralling. I was hooked on it very quickly. What excites me during this podcast is that as you go through all the great movies, is that you get to familiarize yourself with all these iconic moments of popular culture. And so later in the Frankenstein, we have the It's Alive routine with the corpse being revived. In Dracula, you have one of those core introductions of such an iconic cinema character and Halloween costume, because I think that really Lugosi's performance really solidified what we see as Dracula.
Yeah, that's right. So, in both of the original books, in Shelley's Frankenstein and in Stoker's Dracula, both Dracula and Frankenstein are described differently. But I think the costume design, Jack Pierce's costume design for Frankenstein, and then the costume design that they used in Dracula as well, it's just spot on. It's just what we need to see. So, Bela Lugosi himself, who had been playing Dracula on stage, obviously he was an immigrant himself, and that was just the sort of roles he fell into, when he arrived at Ellis Island and he got involved with the Hungarian community in theatre in New York City. By the time he arrived, his accent was pretty much solidified. He could have maybe changed his accent, which some actors from overseas do now when they go to the US, like Charlize Theron and a few other people as well. I'm thinking of some Australian actors that have done that. But that was one of the roles that he went for. So this film, Dracula 1931, is based off the play, which is based off the book. So they have taken their own artistic license with it. But essentially what Dracula tries to do is you have to feel something, you have to be interested in Dracula. And I think if he was portrayed the way he was written in the book, it's a bit like Norman Bates in Psycho. The audience isn't really going to be interested in what he's doing, whereas with Lugosi playing him, there's an authenticity there because he's from that area of the world, but also he's a good-looking man in this cape, and why wouldn't a woman be in love with him type thing? So that's the artistic license they took with the film that I agree with. What are your observations on the film, Matt? Like in terms of the way the film was shot, the story that they went with?
Well, it impressed me with how relatively little special effects and complex editing they created such a haunting story, because many of the core scenes with Dracula, he is completely motionless. Like, and most of the main special effects to create the effect that he's doing some sort of vampire magic, as per se, is to see his sort of little spotlights glowing on his eyes. One critique in one scene, they haven't quite aligned it perfectly. You could sort of see it shaking a bit, but you know what? We'll forgive them for that one. The bat where that shows him to be taking form into, I thought looked a bit tacky. I'd have thought they could have actually taken a leaf out of a lot of the German cinema, which was where a lot of the iconic Dracula imagery came from originally. And for example, they could have had the woman lying in the bed and maybe just a very convincing shadow with crisp lines like fluttering over her. That would have been a lot better, I think. Less is more, as opposed to that model. I love how in both these films, also you have established the Dracula's castle and later Frankenstein's laboratory, and clearly it's done in a studio backdrop, but it's like looking back at King Kong. You find ways to be completely taken away by the theatricality of the background drop.
Yeah, no, I agree. And both of these stories, at least the stories used in the films, could easily translate to stage, because while it was sort of groundbreaking at the time, for us now to put something like that on stage, it'd be quite sort of straightforward for a bunch of theatre technicians and theatre designers to do that. So I wish we'd actually see these whenever they can return to the stage. I'd love to see both of these productions on stage. Look,
Dracula would have been quite easy to do on stage, I think, actually.
Yeah, I would have. I wish there was some sort of recording of his performance on stage as Dracula. I mean, it was the role he was born to play. I mean, really. And I can't believe they were actually thinking of other people to do the role and not Lugosi. You know, he sort of campaigned for it while he was touring with the stage play. He was in California and said, "Hello, what about me?" And they're like, no. And then eventually he got it. So we had who else did we have in this? We had David Manners, we had Helen Chandler. Matt alerted me to the very sad story, who played Nina, the very sad story about Helen Chandler's life, that she was already an alcoholic when she made this film and basically got severely burnt. She got very badly burnt because she left something in her flat going when she was drunk. And
I think she was smoking in bed and she just fell asleep, and that used to be quite a common accident.
Yeah, and that was really, really sad. And I was also reading that apparently she was already really struggling in this film as well. And I didn't actually know that Bela Lugosi had suffered from really bad sciatica that had affected his career, not to mention the fact that, you know, as Fred Gwynne once said, you know, about playing Herman Munster, it was the best thing that could have happened to me. And it was the worst thing that ever could have happened to me, because essentially you're typecast, and that's what people, I mean, look at people like Adam West and stuff, what happened to them in their career, and they were quote unquote serious actors before they played. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, they were, you know, it's very sad when you sort of read the trajectory of these people's career, whereas Boris Karloff, who we will discuss a little bit more in a minute, he seemed to still have quite a flowing career, but a lot of people were like, well, Lugosi was sort of a one-trick pony and Karloff had a bit more depth to what he could do. He was a bit more well-trained. I don't know whether that's fair enough.
Vincent Price was lucky because he did get stuck in a lot of vampire roles, but he managed to get further into the mainstream. It was such an irony because he had such a successful career, but he kept pulling back by this corny studio who had the rights to this particular series, and they just kept guilting him like, you're going to put all these people in the unemployment line if you don't do this crappy movie again.
Oh, I didn't know that. I'll have to read about that. Yeah. I always thought, you know, just Vincent Price was just I mean, obviously had a tradition with horror, but so Todd Browning directed this film, and he had come through the silent film system, the vaudeville system as a child. He'd been an actor himself. Actually, I love the projection. And then this film, Dracula, was based on the play by Hamilton Dean and John Bolston. So there are differences between this. Obviously, the way that Dracula is portrayed in the novel is different to the film, but you have to make it more palatable for the audience. And also just the trajectory of the story with Mina and Renfield, and the characters are sort of swapped around, and Van Helsing, I think, still fills the narrative role that he does. But, you know, often they make changes to make the film a bit easier to understand and a bit more palatable for the audience. Sometimes it's just not going to work trying to convert. I think they were saying that Francis Ford Coppola's version of Dracula was the closest one to the book. And I just, every time I see Gary Oldman in that, I'm just like, have you seen Gary Oldman's makeup in that film. Matt, have you ever seen
No,
it?
I haven't
Just
seen. I
Google
haven't
it.
seen that film. I'm just trying to picture Commissioner Gordon in a vampire movie.
Yeah. But yeah, and obviously John Carradine came and played Dracula after Bela Lugosi did in some other films, and I think he'd initially turned down playing Frankenstein or something as well. But he had the moustache and he was a bit more Vincent Price looking and all the rest of it. But to me, Bela Lugosi is the ultimate Dracula, and just the beautiful production design. I mean, even when Renfield first goes to the castle and there's all those cobwebs everywhere and the light and space. And I know that, yeah, the bat was a bit out there and some of the lights in his eyes and things like that. And, I think, they said that he didn't have a lot of depth as an actor. Perhaps that's why his career never went anywhere. But he was sort of behind the eight ball. He was an immigrant. He spoke with a thick accent. Really, he was whereas I think Boris Karloff, because he'd been trained in a different way and come into Hollywood a bit differently, I think he was just able to sort of parlay that into a few more things. Although he was kind of typecast playing, in horror films as well. So ultimately, Dracula is just one of those films you need to see. It's just, if you're a lover of film, it's one of the films you need to see. There's a lot of other versions. There's Hammer horror versions of Dracula. There's other Universal Dracula films, and Bela Lugosi himself did play Dracula several more times. One film I do want to see him play Dracula in is Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein, I think it is. The last time he plays Dracula is in that film, with Glenn Strange playing Frankenstein.
That would be an interesting turn of events.
And it just looks hilarious. Like, it just looks really out there. I mean, anything with Abbott and Costello in it will. So I actually want to watch. I might watch that tonight. It just looks hilarious. And I'm interested in Glenn Strange's performance as Frankenstein as well. So Dracula 1931, beautiful film. Bela Lugosi is stunning in the film. It's, it's also dependent on whether you like the story as well. I just think Dracula could be even more simplified down. But a lot of the traits of Dracula that we know, the cape, the hair, Dracula not going out in the sunlight. Apparently in the original book, Dracula could go out in the sunlight. So they've obviously taken artistic liberty, but I think Nosferatu started that. So, it works for what it is.
I love the part with the cigarette case.
Yeah, that's right. And also the piece of cardboard stuck over the lamp in the bedroom. Did you see that, Matt? Do you notice that?
No.
So in the bedroom where if you go, just after we get off, just look it up online. There's a piece of cardboard stuck on the lamp in the bedroom where one of the ladies is sleeping. And obviously you're so looking at Lugosi and all the rest of it, so you're not really concentrating on that, but it's there. It's this piece of cardboard. And it just doesn't make any sense. It's like, what is that doing there? But in the script that it got cut out for whatever reason, or in the editing process, the nurse had stuck the cardboard over there to protect, I believe it was Mina's eyes from the harshness of the lamp, but still having some light in the room. But because they cut that part of it out, there's just this piece of cardboard stuck over the lamp. And everyone's like, what is that? And they just didn't really notice it in terms of continuity or anything. So it is supposed to be there, but it's not, because the part that makes it make sense is cut out.
Well, that's a fire hazard. I mean, if the vampire didn't get her a bedroom fire, would have. Oh, I just thought, considering what happened to her a few decades later, a bedroom fire joke probably isn't the best thing. Sorry.
Yeah. The ending of the film is a bit abrupt, and he sort of, I guess he dies off screen, does he? I was sort of like, I went back and rewatched it. I'm like, oh, she's all right, Mina's all right now, and he obviously died off screen. I maybe would have done the ending a little bit differently, but they're just paltry little issues. It's not going to detract from. But it's such a beautiful film, and Bela Lugosi is just such a striking figure. And he was the perfect person for the role, and he's the only one I really want to see in the role. We jump over to Frankenstein, released later that year, 1931, starring, was it William Henry Pratt aka Boris Karloff, who changed his name just because he thought it would be a little bit more theatrical and a bit more cinematic.
I think
So
both those names could count as theatrical.
Yes, definitely. So once again, we have, let me just jump into the notes for that one. So once again, we have, and essentially Frankenstein was released off the back of the success of Dracula. Both, came out later the same year. And I guess for some people, it even eclipsed the success, universal success with Dracula. And I guess the audience wanted more. So director James Whale directed this one. He had a shot at directing pretty much any novel that they had procured the rights for, and he decided to go with Frankenstein. There is a sequel to this film starring Boris Karloff as well, called The Bride of Frankenstein. People might be familiar with that big hair job that the bride has in it. So we've got Colin Clive in this film, another sad case of someone who was an alcoholic as well and led a terrible life. English actor who played Victor Frankenstein. And then we had Dwight Fry. We've got Mae Clarke playing Elizabeth. And we have, let's see here, Dwight Fry was playing Fritz. But, of course, this film really sort of centres around this person who's animated. So let's go into a brief explanation of what Frankenstein's about in case you don't know. Essentially, Dr. Frankenstein is an obsessed scientist, and he creates a living being from various stolen body parts, not realising it has a madman's brain. So there are differences from this one to the book. What were your initial thoughts about this one, Matt?
Well, one of the surprises about Dr. Frankenstein himself, and I had the same experience when I studied the book in high school, is that the stereotype is to think of this outsider professor as being quite old, but he's actually extremely young, like in his like he's sort of at graduate student age. So like we've heard of getting a bit too obsessed with our graduate dissertation, but this is a whole new extreme.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
But yeah, I love that movie. It was so thrilling when you're in the castle and the corpse has been animated, and like you'd think, what could be the more tackiest thing possible to do than to impersonate a undead person learning to walk the first time? But Boris Karloff, he did such a great job, and the sort of the showing of how this fairly neutral expression is learning the ways of the world, like learning things about, but also like that, even though he's supposed to have a criminal brain, they don't really play that out so much. It's more that you have an innocent mind sort of learning to trying to learn to interact with the world and sort of not quite knowing the consequences. For example, there's the scene with the little girl, and just that long distance shot of seeing the girl playing in the lake just with some flowers, and the haunting experience of, oh god, something really bad's going to happen, and then Karloff comes out and like he has no sinister intentions. He's like literally just learning to play, and he doesn't think any different of throwing the girl into the water like it's some part of a game. And like when you think of it, when we're kids, we probably do quite rough games all the time. We just don't realize how dangerous they can be when we're taller.
Yeah. yeah. So the movie and the play, I guess, from that matter, because this again was based on a play rather than the book as such, but the play was based on the book. I actually liked Frankenstein because it was quite just simple and to the point, and he creates this creature, and the creature sort of, doesn't realise that the brain that was stolen was a criminal's brain, and very easy to follow. And, the tragedy of this being coming into, I'm not really sure where the film was supposed to be set. I'm thinking it was set in Germany or something because everyone's wearing lederhosen and stuff like that. But everyone spoke with an English accent.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Well, the book was set in Switzerland, I'm pretty sure.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so, but apparently in the book he spoke more and he had more skills, and there was definitely, undertones, and Dr. Frankenstein and his whole family were affected by really liked Clive in this film as well, and I was very sad to hear, although both of them are in Bride of Frankenstein, so it's definitely worth checking that film out, which I will intend to do as well. So ultimately,
I splashed out and got the whole Universal bulk package on iTunes.
Oh, good for you. Yeah, no, definitely. And it was part of that original universe, like the Universal Monsters universe. So, of course, you had The Mummy, which Boris Karloff played as well. You had Dracula. You had Frankenstein, obviously. You had the Wolfman, Bride of Frankenstein, and both Karloff and Lugosi did work together. They worked together in a few other films, Black Raven and several others for Universal. There was rumours that they didn't get along particularly well, but I guess well enough to make the movies. I think someone said that Karloff didn't regard Lugosi as good an actor as he was. I don't know if that's fair to say, but, both of them were foreigners and did amazing stuff. It's just sort of sad what happened to Bela Lugosi, but I think Boris Karloff, he kept working well into the older stages of his career. Definitely in the 60s, he was still appearing on TV, 50s and 60s, he was still appearing on TV shows. So again, just two films that even if they're not necessarily your cup of tea, just watch them. Just watch them, imbibe them, take them in. And, it's Shelley's story and Stoker's story are just iconic as well. And I've started reading both books and I need to finish both of them as well. So, is there anything you'd like to say in closing, Matt?
Did I request you to give us 5 stars at the end of the show? If I didn't, I'm doing that now.
Yeah, definitely. So I think both of us, I just enjoyed the story in Frankenstein a bit more. There's subtext in both of the films, but it's, whatever subtext you want to also infer from it, is kind of interesting as well. Often they have these texts, especially Frankenstein is something that's studied in high schools and things like that. Matt, you said you
that was
studied
one of
it.
my favorite topics to study.
Yeah,
Like
and
the ethics of scientific research and everything.
yeah, exactly. Also, I guess in Dracula, sort of unrequited love and living forever, and is that a good or bad thing? And these other forces that can exist on other people's personalities and things that are unnatural in nature but are natural to these creatures. So there's a lot of subtext there, and you can get as into it as you want, or you can just watch the movies from start to finish and enjoy them for what they are. So our next edition of When Movies Were Good, Matt and I were discussing, a very, very well-known classic film actor or actress that we've never really seen much of their work. So we've decided to go with the great Marlene Dietrich. We're going to do 2 films of hers that were in her later stages of her career. So Destry Rides Again with her and James Stewart, sequel to the first Destry film, which is 1954. And also A Touch of Evil, which is a film I've wanted to see for a long time and one of Matt's favourite films, Orson Welles. Marlene Dietrich's in that film as well, and that's 1958. So that'll be a good one to do.
Yeah, well, I'll always enjoy having an excuse to rewatch an Orson Welles movie.
That's right. Matt's a really big fan of Orson Welles. It's just, Orson Welles pretty much has your idea of perfect career, doesn't he? Going from the stage to film.
Wasn't so keen on how his career went after World War II, but we'll leave that for the episode.
Yes, and some of his exploits in later life were a bit interesting, but yeah, definitely a very talented man. So thank you for joining us for Dracula and Frankenstein. We're sorry about the audio quality. We just have to make do the best we can. It's obviously a lot better on Matt's end because Matt's got the technical expertise, and also I think it's my internet connection. It's not the greatest, but that's fine. We'll work with that, and hopefully we can get back together recording sooner rather than later.
Yes, I can't wait.
Yeah, no, it'll be awesome. So in the meantime, I'm Rachel.
I'm Matthew.
And Matthew. I think there's a bit of a delay as well. And we're watching good movies. So thank you very much, guys, and have a great one. Take care.
Till next time.